Hey everybody, welcome back to the Live Ultralight podcast. Today we have a very special episode. We're literally on the top of the mountain at about almost 10,000 feet, sitting at a lake, watching a sunset and some little chicks swim around a lake. Absolutely gorgeous. And we have this very special guest of Backcountry Exposure, or as some of you may know, Devin is his first name. But welcome back to the podcast, Devin.
I know, I think the last time we were also on a trip.
Yeah? Which trip was that?
That was the Chop Rock Escalante trip.
Did we do that one on trail?
We did.
Man, yeah, we just sat around the phone, right?
We sat around the phone and chatted. It was a good time.
Yeah.
I loved that.
That trip was a lot of fun. Like, I think about that. I really would love to get back into some of those canyons again.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like your neck of the woods, right? You love spending time there. And
pretty much, if I have a choice, that's where I like to explore off trail as much as possible, all of the different like nooks and crannies of the canyons, which, I mean, I love areas like we're in right now, but it doesn't have quite the same appeal that being in the desert does. So
yeah, we were joking about this, and I mean, we'll introduce Devin here a little more formally in a second, but sometimes it's always like you want what's not in your backyard. And so us living in southern Utah, you know, we're around the Red Rock country quite a lot, and so I'm always like, man, let's get into the high country, let's get to the Uintas. So I'm like, man, you're so lucky you're up by the Uintas, and he's like, yeah, you're lucky you got Zion in your backyard, you know. So it seems to be how it goes, but that trip was epic for sure.
Yeah.
So real quick, let's have you give kind of a quick background of just your history in the outdoors, and then what you're doing with like your channel and some stuff like that. So.
I was blessed, I guess, if you want to put it that way, to grow up in a family that our vacations were to go camping, and I grew up going to mountain lakes like what we're at right now and spending time fishing with my dad. And I just throughout like my whole childhood and my teenage years and even like into early adulthood, everything was focused around being outside. So I realized, or a friend of mine actually had mentioned that the college, the local university, had an outdoor recreation management degree. And that sounded very interesting to me. And so I maturated into the outdoor recreation management program at Utah Valley University and graduated with that degree. And that really was a huge springboard into just really developing a passion for what I do now. And it was taking like the various like theories and just the ideas of what being outside provides that helped enhance the experiences that I wanted to have when I would go out. Because before it was just like, oh, I want to go like on a backpacking trip, and like we're just going to go backpacking. It didn't really have as much, like it wasn't as goal oriented. But now I try to make sure that when I'm going on a trip, I want to have something that is like developmental, I guess, in a way, whether that's being out with a fairly large group like we're out in right now that develops relationships and opportunities to meet new people and just kind of network in a way. But also if I'm going out like with my kids, then I have the opportunity to spend that one-on-one developmental time with my kids. And so I feel like my trips are just more intentional now, and my education is to blame for that. if that makes sense.
So basically it sounds like at some point you had kind of this switch from where outdoor stuff was fun, like that you grew up maybe doing it for entertainment, but it actually switched a little bit to be a little more purpose driven at this point. Does that sum that up kind of?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And then, I mean, you've taken that and you worked at a climbing gym for a long time, doing some things there. And while you were doing that, you started a YouTube channel. right? And or did you maybe you started that while you were doing your education as well? I'm not sure, but started this YouTube channel called Backcountry Exposure, where he does a bunch of really good gear reviews and comes at it definitely. I mean, from my experience, is what I'm going to describe it as is you come at it from the angle of like you spend a lot of time outside, you spend a lot of time using the gear, your gearhead. And then that also, translated into a career move for you that we'll talk about here in a second. But, yeah, like your channel, if I like in my mind is technical, it's performance focused, it's usability focused, and it's not so much like, how to say, like, it's not just here's the product and let me like just quickly show you the product. It's like, in depth. I got this specific piece of gear for this specific purpose, and this is my review of how it did in that specific situation, which is way more valuable from my side at least, to an end consumer. But how else would you describe your channel?
No, that's pretty accurate. So I started my channel in, I think it was like October of 2012. So the way that the YouTube has changed over that like 8-year or so span has changed a lot of the ways that I approach my channel. But in general, like I started the channel because I needed an outlet and I wasn't doing, so to go back in my like history a little bit, I'm also a photographer, but I was doing wedding photography and like portrait photography for a period of time. And I had stopped doing that completely, and I wasn't doing any of that like creative aspect that I didn't realize that my mind needed. And so the YouTube channel started as a creative outlet, and it developed into, as I was kind of moving through my education in college, I became very like kind of analytical about the use of gear and why you would use certain pieces of gear for things. And so I've taken...
I want to dig on that for a second here.
Okay.
What was that switch? Because I feel like I have a relationship with that. I feel like a lot of people listening to this also maybe are right there, where they're starting to realize like first step is getting out and just doing stuff. And then like the more you do it, or at some point, it seems to be this switch where the gear starts to really matter and need to do a specific thing. It seems like, so tell me about like when that switch was for you and what happened there.
I would say that, so I had always had like essentially the basic gear items that I needed to go out and do trips. But there was a specific trip that I went on in college as one of my classes that just was very apparent that some of the stuff that I had did not meet the needs of that trip. Mm-hmm. And it was... part of it was we were walking in very cold water for like 30 miles of distance in like...
What trail is that? Remind me not to take that one.
No, that would actually be something that would be a ton of fun to do together. But it's the Paria River Canyon, the Vermilion Cliffs National Monument on the Utah-Arizona border. Mm-hmm. Amazing area. But we went at a time where the cubic feet per second that the Paria River was running was at 90, which, to put that into context, constant above the knee wading through water in narrow canyons. So take a canyon as narrow as like the Zion Narrows, mm-hmm. and you're in like mid-thigh depth water that is in like high 40s, mid 40s degrees temperature. So
there's no outlet.
There's no outlet.
Like you can climb out.
Yeah, and at one point we had to essentially wade up to like chest height. So we'd take our packs off, and this is not standard for somebody going down that canyon and you like... It was...
Sounds intense.
It was kind of intense. And it was a really great learning experience. But what I took from that is a lot of the gear that I have, in any other like perfect scenario, which is typically the mild type of settings that I would find myself in like the Uintas, for example.
Whoa.
All of
the Uintas are not mild all the time, but go on.
That's true.
But on a like tonight, this is the most beautiful setting. Yeah. The weather's been perfect. Just watching little duckies kick around the lake. Like in this setting, is that what you're talking about?
That's fair. That's fair. I'll give you that. But essentially, like, I really recognize that what I have does not fit the needs, and I absolutely need to be more deliberate about having gear items that match the conditions and the environmental aspects that allow for you to be not only safe but also comfortable, and creates the opportunity for an experience that doesn't allow for type 3 fun.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
I think anyone who's listening to this knows type 3 fun. Not fun in the moment, not fun to talk about. But I mean, before we move on from this trip, like, did you have moments where you were like scared or like, you know what I mean? Where, I mean, if you're walking in, you said it was cold water, right? Like, did you start to like lose a lot of body heat? Was there something there, or maybe what piece of gear was it that you're like, this sucked, I needed this for that specific trip? That's a really unique trip.
Primarily it was the clothing layers that I had for basic, aside from like sleeping in, or I had like a warm coat, the shorts that I was wearing were incorrect for those conditions. And I was wearing a cotton t-shirt, and it just was not the right setup for. And you might think that, like, dude, you're part of an outdoor recreation management program. Like, shouldn't the professors be more deliberate and like only take these things?
Because, well, at this point, were you adjuncting? So just
no, I was a student.
Oh, I was saying this so the professor should have helped you be more aware of this.
Yeah, I'm just saying that, like, maybe people listening right now are like, what professors are going to let somebody go out and and do this? But like, you have to understand too that there's a lot of trips that happen, and I don't know. We don't need to get into it, but
no.
I don't want to rabbit hole too much on the concept of like cotton kills and like
but
that idea.
But aware, like, it wasn't really on your radar at that point. And then you go on this trip, and it's like, this was maybe borderline scary or like really uncomfortable. And you came back thinking, I've got to figure out better systems in this.
Yeah, and that included having a proper sleeping pad that was insulated and the right situation for sleeping. Because you always think, and I think this is very common for new backpackers to think, oh, all of my warmth is going to come out of my sleeping bag, so whatever pad I use doesn't really matter. So I'll just jump on Amazon or whatever I can find cheap at a big box store, and that'll make it comfortable to sleep. But so much of your sleep system is the pad that you use.
Yeah. Like, I think this, like, we put out a video a while ago that said like 80% of backpackers doing this wrong. Because clear back when I was doing customer support, you know, in like 2016 still, the company was still getting started. That was like the most common thing. It's like, hey, I was cold in your bag. And the first question I'd say is, well, what did you sleep on? Oh, an air mattress. And I'd be like, there's no bag that will keep you warm on that air mattress in those conditions. And so I would even say something like, if I was going to be camping in 15 degrees Fahrenheit, and I had to make a choice between having a sleeping pad that was rated to 15 degrees Fahrenheit or a sleeping bag that was rated for 15 degrees Fahrenheit, I would choose the sleeping pad with, like, say, a 30-degree bag, because I can add extra layers and stuff like that on top of me, or like I can wear extra clothes to bed and stretch the warmth of a bag. But a pad is so much harder to do that, and people, I want to stress that, you know what I mean? Just stress that so much that so much warmth comes or is lost from a pad.
Yeah, and what, I guess, to explain a little bit more of the progression, I realized over time, this one trip didn't have this all of a sudden like massive opening of like realization of this is how you do everything, because that's just not how it works. You get educated and you learn things over time and through experiences. And what I learned over time is that everything has a system, and creating systems that provide good opportunities for good experiences is what I focus on. So when I'm preparing to go on a backpacking trip, I'm taking a lot of things into consideration that allow me to create an entire system that is what I'm wearing while I'm hiking, but also what I have in my backpack that provides the opportunity for a good experience.
Right, because you are not a fair weather backpacker. You are not someone who just comes and goes backpacking in July. You backpack year round. Mm-hmm. You do lots of trips, and on your channel, you also showcase, you going out in the dead of winter, snowshoeing into places, usually utilizing a hot tent. Mm-hmm. So describe it a little bit, maybe, because I would imagine. Well, maybe let me ask it this way: have you always winter backpacked, or how did that get developed for you? And was that a progression in and of itself?
No, I would say within the last 5 years, that recent, even after I had graduated. So I graduated in 2017. I was I only backpack from April or May to September. And I had not ever really done any trips outside of those months. But it was I know what I'm doing, and there's no reason why I can't go and have good experiences all year round.
Yeah.
But I got to have the right gear, as well as
built some confidence that led you to start thinking that, right?
Yeah, but I started small, and going into doing some desert trips way later in the season that were late October, early November, where I'm not dealing with snow, I'm not dealing with really cold temperatures, but the aspect of the temperature difference in the temperature swing, and
in the desert it swings,
and shorter days. I think that was another aspect that I didn't really consider. But it's okay, it's going to get...
I'm going to be in my tent for 12 hours.
Yeah, I'm going to be in this desert canyon, and the sun is going to go behind this canyon at 3:30, and I'm not going to have any sunlight. How does that change how I feel?
Yeah.
Whether I'm with a group or I'm alone, it doesn't really matter. It's just okay, the conditions have changed significantly versus 3:30 in July in the desert, which obviously that's a terrible idea because it's massively hot.
Yeah.
But it was just kind of touching into those different experiences that I had before on trips. And then eventually I was yeah, I'm going winter camping, and took the hot tent and loved it.
Yeah.
Just loved it.
Yeah. So, when you're kind of dabbling into this and getting into this, in my opinion, developing that layering system or knowledge of, quick drying fabrics and warm, fabrics that might be warm when they're wet, or just these things that start compounding. I imagine you had developed just a lot of confidence before you started to hot tent. Does that sound right?
Yeah, and I think I have my channel to blame for that, honestly. But
your job with your channel was to get more educated, right?
Yeah, because part of my goal, and this kind of goes back to your original question, is I had spent so much time getting educated that I wanted to be able to share that with other people. And so early on in my channel, I spent a lot of time going over educational type of things instead of just a gear review or here's the tips and tricks or 5 mistakes that all backpackers make, which that's fun content to make as a YouTube creator, but I don't think it has as much depth to what somebody might really be looking for in getting out of a video. And I recognize too that a lot of the topics and things that I talk about, they don't get a lot of views, but I find a lot of fulfillment out of comments that I get from people that say, this helped me like understand this better, or I didn't realize that this product could be used that way, or whatever it is. Just the fact that like I took the time to test and use and figure out all the nuances of a product and then share it on my channel and like try to create some education around that.
Yeah. And I mean, I would never say that your channel doesn't get views. You have a large channel, and it gets a lot of views. You've had some breakout videos as well, but I like that you're conscious of that, saying like, this is what I think needs to be made, not necessarily just what's going to get the clicks and the growth, right?
And for the record, I'm not always right. Like
no one is.
And I recognize that. Like I may put out a video and I express my opinion or I express something and it's incorrect. And people tell me that, but like I'm also not, I don't know everything.
Right. No one does. I will say this, anyone who creates anything will have situations where either they misspoke or said something wrong or didn't have the level of knowledge needed. But also, like, you just put yourself on a pedestal to get fired at. You know what I mean? Like, people are going to say, you know, there's just keyboard warriors out there. But no, I find that your content is comes from someone who has a lot of experience and a lot of time in field and a lot of even educational background. And so it's really spot on for so many people, and I'm sure helps a lot of people. I want to ask you this question because we kind of started to get into it, but tell me about like the coldest or the worst winter backpacking experience you had, and just how that like happened, and walk me through maybe some of the gear choices that were helpful or not helpful. Or maybe you've just had nothing but great winter trips. I don't know.
Yeah, I can't actually effectively answer that because I genuinely feel like having access and use of a hot tent is, I wouldn't say it's cheating, but
it's like a fail-safe.
Using it in the right ways provides so much like security mentally, where if I go out, I know that I've got basically guaranteed warmth, because it's not that difficult to keep a fire burning in a box, but you're able to keep your clothing dry. You're able to like sleep more comfortably because you're not as concerned about the temperature dipping as much. And if you wake up at 2:00 in the morning and it's 15 degrees outside, you just light the fire and like get going again. But
stoke it.
Yeah, so honestly, I've not had any bad, like really intense winter experiences, and that's where I'll say that I'm a little bit of a diva with like camping in the snow, where I try to only go out in conditions that are as favorable as possible for snow winter camping.
It makes a difference. Even the planning of like the trip, getting that tent set up, because I've had situations where I'm trying to build a stove and my fingers are numb, the sun's going down, like I got to camp too late, you know?
Yeah. And this is a little bit of a tangent, but there's also this idea around, at least it was a trending thing through YouTube over the last year, is like, how low of a temperature can I camp in? And it was like, you'd see all these...
You're talking about someone in particular, it's not me, right?
You'd see all these thumbnails that were like negative 50 degrees Fahrenheit, or like super, super low temperatures, and like people trying to just like show how intense they were with their winter camping. And
I hope this, because I'm going to interview one of the other YouTubers like in a few days that I think you're talking about, and as well as myself. So what I would say is, when I go and do that, for anyone listening to this, I hope you know I'm not inviting you guys to go and do this. What I hope I'm conveying is that we are thoroughly testing our gear and proving out concepts and developing that. But no, I think if you're winter camping, you should listen to Devin. Go on good days, be well prepared. A hot tent setup is very helpful as well. But
I'll at least share a type of experience, maybe not a specific trip, but something that is, I don't know, I think it answers your question a little bit better, is I've spent some very, very cold mornings and just days in general in some very cold desert canyons where you don't have a choice to not walk in the water all day. And
you're getting up, the sun's not hitting you, and you just step right into icy water.
Yeah, it's like 8 o'clock in the morning. You've got like a 10-mile day ahead of you, which that's a pretty decent day in some of these canyons, and the water is frigid. Yeah, and like it's all you can do to just get out onto the bank and let your feet like have a break from being in such cold water.
Yeah. I mean, the desert is crazy in the sense that, like, I think most people think desert and they think, Arizona and it's hot all the time and it's this and that. But where we're talking about desert, the temperature swings are massive. Like I say, I feel like you can see, like even in like winter season or 3-season type conditions, you could see, in the daytime 70 degrees, and then you could see it swing to like 20 degrees at night, which is just, 50 degree variation is a massive thing. And so then
the wind aspect in a lot of those situations it's piercing. You just can't escape it.
Yeah. So talking about getting into some of these situations, tell me what you think are some of like the biggest gear aspects or performance aspects of gear that should be on people's minds. We are talking about sleeping pads, so we'll count that as, the first one, I guess. But like when you started to make this switch of being really conscious about gear and you continued down that path, looking backwards now, what do you think were some of the biggest steps that changed things the most for you?
Ooh, that is a...
Yeah,
that's
and that could be like
a big question.
Yeah, it is. So I'll try to like give you some thoughts. It could be related to like clothing, performance of clothing, quick drying, or it could be like weight, just even stuff like that.
Yeah. So something most recent is I have very recently become a massive lover of synthetic materials, like synthetic jackets and primarily just around like up top layers. But for the longest time, I was like, down is king. Down is everything in staying warm and having the best like comfort opportunities possible. And you need a really high quality down jacket, and that's the only way to do it. And I've just learned that that's really not true. Yeah. Three of my favorite pieces of apparel are synthetic.
Yeah.
And
why is that though? Like maybe explain why. Yeah, right? Because like people, that is just like get a puffy jacket, but there's pros and cons to it, right?
There is, and I think, however, that we've reached a point in technology with the way that stuff is designed and how it's all come together that synthetic materials, they're not, because I guess if you back up a little bit and you consider like, well, back in 1995 when I was 9, 6, 7, whatever years old, your synthetic sleeping bag was the ginormous barrel-sized like Coleman sleeping bag. But your down sleeping bag was like super packable, and like that's just not really the case anymore because fabrics and technology and everything has like advanced so much that the performance of synthetic is at or greater than what a lot of down products are able to offer.
Especially in terms of versatility, I would say.
Yeah, versatility, a lot of like the breathability aspects, and I've learned a lot that like down is a great insulator when you are not moving.
Yeah.
synthetic is great for active and movement and for sitting around.
Yeah, I mean, in some of the way that I see this too. Oh, go
ahead. But that's not to say that like down products are inferior, or they're not good, or you shouldn't use down products. It's
application specific, and what I think has hurt some of the gear choices that people are making now is the commercialism per se of down products and puffy jackets, because in actuality, if you have let's just say like a down coat versus a down jacket versus a down sweater, you know what I mean? When you get down to something like a down sweater, you have to baffle it or sew it into such tight channels. It's not really lofting that much more, but you're having to use downproof fabrics. You're introducing tons more sewing lines through the piece, et cetera, where like a down sweater, yeah, I'm to me, in my personal layering system, like I'm going to go with the synthetic piece over that every time, because the synthetic piece, you can have almost no baffles in it. And then you have that usefulness of being able to be more active in it, breathable, stuff like that. But I wonder at least if maybe some of that commercialism of down, hyping that up and stuff has led to using down in some applications that aren't the most advantageous.
Yeah, and I've also just learned that over time of use, the synthetic products that I've been using lately, you don't have the migration through the baffles that you get with down. And what I notice most often is the underside of your sleeve becomes like, because you're always like, that's where you're setting your arm down. And when you put your arm down, like that pressure pushes the down out away from that point. Or like your elbow becomes a cold spot, like under your armpit, and all of those areas that you have like constant kind of an impact, and it just migrates and pushes the down away from that. And it's really hard on those lightweight jackets that don't have a lot of like baffle space for you to move that back. Like it almost creates a memory within the fabric that now that jacket is not going to perform as well because you've got cold spots.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely a point to notice. I think it's also why, I mean, some of the pieces that we've released have just been so popular inside the office, outside the office, sales, PR, and I think it's just the people that are actually putting them to use out there, start to develop those experiences, and you just continue to always push that forward in gear. I think, I love to talk about gear. I think people that are listening to this podcast love to talk about gear. And, hopefully we bring on and talk, try to equal out both education as much as just gear. But you're always evolving your gear system. It's just always improving. And I mean, I've seen it on your channel. You've been harping up some of these pieces, and you've just been really in love with them. And I think that's like amazing. I wonder if you've had any experiences in specific where this stand out, where you're like, man, this synthetic piece, like I'm like just stood out, or maybe it was you were using a down piece where you're like, man, I wish I had the synthetic. Like, is there a use case scenario where someone might be able to see or flip that switch for themselves?
Ooh. You're full of
I'm full of these good questions.
All these really deep questions.
I'm so inspired sitting here at this lake. I will say this.
Got to put me on the spot.
Yeah. This setting is next level. I do not think I will ever have a podcast in a setting as good as this. I mean, this is just phenomenal.
This is really great.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll make a comparison of two products. They're not Outdoor Vitals products. Am I allowed to share the?
Yeah, no. Go right ahead. No bias here.
So, I really love the Arc'teryx line of apparel, and I've been wearing Arc'teryx for over a decade, and just really have enjoyed. Like their Atom LT is kind of a staple piece. Like that is a piece of apparel that they're kind of known for. And then they've got their Cerium. And those two pieces for a long time were...
Cerium is a down piece?
The Cerium is a down jacket. And while the application of those two are not like a direct competitor of each other, the benefit that I found of using the Atom in certain applications outweighed what the Cerium. And it kind of just goes back to the idea of like, you can use a synthetic piece more so as an active piece in a mid layer in a lot of ways where the down is just too hot. Mm-hmm. And that's what I like about, and I still don't know if this is answering your question,
no, I think
but
that's good.
But what I like about synthetic is it's proven to just feel more versatile. And then recently, because the Cerium has always been a favorite down jacket of mine. Like the one I've got just has like patches all over it.
Have you ever found that like washing it helps revive it, or do you feel like the memory's still in it, like you were saying?
Washing definitely helps with the loft because obviously the oils from your body and stuff get into the down, but it's never the same. It's never the same as new.
Okay. Yeah.
But earlier this year, I bought the Arc'teryx Nuclei, and I mean it's an expensive like $300 jacket. Like it's
synthetic down.
It's synthetic, and I love that thing. Like it's so nice. Like I don't expect to wear my Cerium like ever again because of it.
Like phased out.
But I mean, part of that is also the fact that like some of the pieces from Outdoor Vitals have also replaced some of those other items because, like the Ventus, for example, that piece specifically is one of the best mid layers I've ever owned because it's lightweight, but I can be active in it in a lot of the conditions that I find myself in, where I'll start hiking in the morning and it's like high 30s, low 40s, and you just need something that is going to take the chill off. But if I had something heavier weight than that, I would be overheating. But underneath a thicker like insulation layer, I'm not trying. No, we're on the Outdoor Vitals podcast right now, but like it genuinely is one of my favorite pieces of apparel I've ever used because of how versatile it is in its application. And like I've just not used, like even a grid fleece overheats. I feel like they just don't breathe the way, or they wick the moisture. Like, you ever worn a fleece against your backpack and then you take your backpack off and you like start feeling your hands on your back and you're like, dude, my hands are soaking wet. Like, this thing is never going to dry.
Yeah. No, I mean, I appreciate that comment, but I also know that Devin's a guy that would never blow smoke. He's not one to give a compliment that he doesn't believe in. So, no, it's appreciated for sure. And I think that drives home the point of just that aspect, looking at a piece as this all-encompassing piece. What's it going to do? How's it going to perform in all of these conditions? And, if you're someone who maybe only is ever going to fair weather backpack and you're going to get to camp early, sit around, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, then down and that application may be the one. But what Devin really is describing is like, Devin's active. Devin's covering miles. Devin's doing these things that give, and so these synthetic pieces are giving you just that versatility, which has become a staple for you now. Going back to that original question, unless you got more on this topic.
Well, I was just going to say, like, there's even situations where, like, I've worn the Ventus as a mid-layer piece, and then in conditions of, like, I don't know, about 50 degrees as a low temperature, I'll wear a down vest over top of it.
Yeah.
And just to, like, give my core a little bit more, and it's a fantastic pairing.
Yeah. I think I've seen you do that in a video, and we've done it a little bit here. Tyler, one of the members of our office, calls it because we've got a Nova vest, and then we've got the Ventus, and he calls it his Noventus, when he pairs those. But he likes to do that a lot too. So we've covered two. We've got a pad. We've talked about like the down versus synthetic for this jacket. I think we've got maybe time to slip in one other just performance aspect that you've learned in these last handful of years that stand out, if you've got any more.
Maybe talk about my love for freestanding tents.
Sure.
And my dislike for non-freestanding tents.
Yeah. So we are going to have difference of opinions on here. It may get ugly, but no, it'll be good. But I do want to hear this. You've used them all. I mean, you've used a whole variety, and would love to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, and I have everything under the sun, like tent-wise.
Yeah.
I probably have like 30 tents sitting in my everything from big 8-man tents for family camping trips and down to really tiny single wall, super ultralight, like 1 pound type of shelters, like Dyneema, expensive, ridiculous type of things. But what I've found is that at least for a lot of the trips that I do, I may be setting up on slick rock pretty often, where I literally cannot drive stakes into the ground, and so I'm reliant on heavy rocks or just being able to use other things, usually rocks, to be able to effectively pitch a tent. And my experience is that I'm just less comfortable overall, and this is just me personally, in a non-freestanding tent, because typically those tent styles are more of a pyramid shape, and so you have like steeper walls, there's less room to move around in them, and while they do offer lighter weight for most of the time, the livability aspect is a big deal for me, and there's only so many non-freestanding tents that provide like the livable space that I want out of a tent. Mm-hmm. So part of it is like environmental conditions, where a non-freestanding tent set up on slick rock just doesn't fly.
Yeah, so Devin takes groups often through a university down into the desert, as well as your own trips, and you're going into some of these national parks, some of these areas just outside national parks that are heavy slick rock, dry beds of canyons and stuff like that, where it feels like it's concrete trying to get a stake in sometimes, but some conditions that are pretty unique. In when you're talking slick rock, he's talking about a sandstone rock that just the entire ground is just rock. There's no dirt really, or a little sand maybe, but that's about it.
I'm glad you bring up the point that I do guide and take students out, because when I've got a group of 10 students out there, the fiddle factor aspect is super important.
Yeah, you need to get it done.
If I'm spending so much time setting up my tent and stakes keep pulling on a non-freestanding tent, and I spend even an extra 15 minutes sometimes, can be the difference in my ability to spend time with a student that needs some additional attention. And so the idea that a freestanding tent just provides really quick, really easy opportunity for me to just have everything set up super fast, and doesn't have that high fiddle factor, then like I'm good.
So because I guess the theme of this podcast so far has really been kind of going from pre-Devin analyzing all his gear at extreme level to post-Devin analyzing gear extreme level, being a little more performance focused or whatever. So maybe describe the difference between a tent you used 10 years ago versus a tent you use now, and what you're getting out of that in performance and in the field.
It goes back to, what do I need the gear to do for me?
Right.
And so creating that system. So previously, like young Devin, would have been, cool, I have my Kelty tent, and this is the tent that I own. This is the tent that I invested in. So this is what I'm going to use for every trip. And it's just what it is. And I understand that a lot of people, that they either don't have the budget for multiple options, or they just choose to not invest into a bunch of different options. Like, I'm kind of ridiculous in the amount of options that I have to choose from. But part of that is because I use that to be able to like share as much options and comparison with people. But present Devin is very focused on, again, like, what does this need to do for me? So, for example, I've got a Nemo Dagger 2-person tent that's like almost 5 pounds in weight, but I don't really care about the weight because I chose to take that tent because it would be the most comfortable for when I take my daughter out on a trip. And I've got 2 pads side by side, and I know that us being side by side in the tent together allows for the most like space opportunity and the ability to be the most comfortable. And I'm not going to compromise that experience to just save an extra 2 pounds or whatever to take a different tent that may not provide that same experience.
So you're making a tent choice based on the specific trip and the specific, whether that's both, conditions of where you're going, but also conditions of maybe weather, people coming with you. Obviously, like this one, you're saying if there's someone coming, with you inside your tent, or you're bringing someone along. So you're just weighing all of these and then making the most educated choice. What,
Yeah, or like, if I am expecting weather, then I will absolutely choose the shelter option that is going to handle that weather the best.
Right. So going backwards, have you ever had issues with the tent, that where it didn't perform and that kind of drove you to reinforce this point for you, whether that be just a miserable night of sleep, whether that be an actual failure or something, which hopefully it wasn't. But, what kind of drove you into this position? Was there any experiences that just were like, yeah, I mean, I know I've had some, and sometimes it's just, I pack this tent in that's so stinking heavy and then I have no reason for it, as far as like it's beautiful weather, beautiful conditions, or, but I've also had situations where, I took a tent in the winter. It wasn't very proven to me. And, that tent I'll probably never use again, for certain specific reasons where it was just didn't meet the needs of that one. And I was getting way too much draft underneath it. It was, as a hot tent scenario. So I'm getting all this draft, and I couldn't get enough stakes and like guy lines onto the specific tent. And, as far as performance, it kind of barely made it through the conditions for me, which is, I guess a story that I've had. But anything like that come to mind for you?
Yeah, two specific experiences. One is a bit more, I think, easier for people to understand, and it was just the fact that I was using a super ultralight focused type of tent that was using like 10 and 15 denier fabrics with a pretty low hydrostatic head and also nylon. So like hydrostatic head being essentially how waterproof,
how much pressure it takes.
How much pressure that fabric can take before it essentially will wet out. But with a really low denier fabric that's very lightweight, and sure, it's like a 2.5 pound tent that like is fun to carry because it's not heavy on your back, but in conditions where heavy rain and consistent rain where like it didn't let up for a long time, that tent became nearly impossible to keep tight. And because of the design of the tent, I'm not going to call it the company, but the design of the tent, they didn't have the ability for you to tension anything. Like they were fixed loop lengths on a nylon tent. Yeah. And what happened is the rain fly just sagged so much that eventually water was just coming through the mesh.
Wow.
It was a bad situation.
Yeah, that sounds pretty bad.
But then second to that is just this year, actually, I used a new tent that I was testing that in the desert, you get a lot of spindrift, or in like high use campsites where all the vegetation has been beaten down and basically non-existent. You have wind come through and it'll blow all of the loose dirt on the top. And your tent almost becomes like a vacuum where under your vestibule, it'll spindrift the dirt and stuff and it will go up in through the mesh. And so this tent that I was using, I was out with students, and the bathtub floor is pretty low. Like, it's about 6 inches high, but the mesh comes all the way down that low. And I would have been better off to have a tent with still like similar design, but if it had some breathable solid fabric that went up the sidewall of the tent, it would have eliminated the at least 4 like big handfuls of sand that blew into the tent.
Wow.
And even with freestanding tents, and this is a freestanding tent, not even a semi-freestanding, like full-on freestanding tent, the wind blew so hard that it pulled the stakes out of the soft sand. And just imagine, like, you're laying on your side sleeping, you're laying on your side, and my face just gets pummeled with like all of the sand that had blown. Just like all of the sand that was collected next to my sleeping pad because the stakes pulled on that side, and the tent just went woof and like flipped over, and all of that sand onto my sleeping bag, onto my face, like down my shirt. It was awful.
That's such a great wake up call, you know.
And it's like, I think I'm a little bit of an anomaly because I'm somebody that would actually consider, like, I'm going to bring a tent in windy conditions that has solid, like, fabric, that's breathable fabric, but solid fabric a little bit higher, that would make it harder for...
Well, I would say you're not an anomaly in the sense that, in that you would take a tent like that. You're an anomaly in the sense that you spend so much time in the desert and doing these, in that specific condition. That is like super rare, amazing conditions to be able to go in. And honestly, in Utah, it's some of the only country to really be able to do that. So, as people are listening to this, around the world and whatnot, I think the takeaway there is to pick the tent that fits your conditions and be adamant about it. Not every tent is going to fit everyone's conditions, and even from a design perspective like us, we design a tent that fits the parameters and the conditions that we're looking for. But that does not mean that it's going to fit everyone's needs. And so, here at Outdoor Vitals, a big push for us is to do as much education as we can. Again, our owl is a symbol of wisdom to us, our logo, and that's really just because we're spearheading this concept that all consumers, everyone that's getting outdoors is doing their own education. That they're becoming their own, they're developing their own wisdom instead of just taking someone else's advice. And so, Devin, I think what you did really well here tonight was to showcase these different conditions that you go in, and these different factors that you look at, and these different aspects that matter to you in all these conditions. And I think that's a huge takeaway for the listener is gear. There's so much gear options out there. Apparently there's 30 tents in Devin's garage. You can pick between these, but the more you understand what the pieces of gear do, and the more you understand the applications you're going into, the better you're going to be able to execute what Devin was saying at the very beginning, which is, that perfect trip where everything is performing and you're not having issues in the field. You're able to just focus on being there, being present, and having an amazing time.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And what I want to say too, though, is I'm an average guy. Just an average guy that just enjoys spending as much time outside as possible. And I also recognize, and I'm like humbled and very grateful for what my channel has provided opportunity-wise to have so much access to different gear items so that I can test things and be able to be so nerdy about like very fine detail things that give you the chance to make gear decisions like that. And I recognize that that is not the opportunity for everybody, but there are a lot of really great gear items that can be a one-stop shop and a one piece that fits the mold for a lot of situations that any average person would find themselves in.
Yep.
And you don't have to get so nerdy about your gear the way that I do to go have a good time in the backcountry. Like, and I think that's also super important to recognize is just go outside and have fun. And I think it's easy for you to get in the mindset of, well, I want to be as ultralight as possible. I don't want to carry more than like 15 pounds ever, or I have to have like these very specific things. And if that's like what helps you enjoy your time outside, then like go for it. But at the end of the day, just whatever makes you happy to go have a good time, like go do it.
Yeah. It's way more important to be out there than to not be out there at whatever level or budget or whatever you've got going on. For sure. I would 100% second that. And you know, I've been having this thought a lot lately where, you know, obviously we harp a lot about lightweight stuff and being as light and minimal as possible. But really, like you keep peeling back the layers, and a lot of just what being, you know, light or ultralight means is the amount of miles you can cover. So, or how you feel, you know, after a certain amount of miles and stuff like that. So there's times when like I'm carrying a heavy pack and stuff like that, and the miles are just going to feel a little bit heavier, or I'm not going to be able to go as far. And so it doesn't mean you have to go out there and crush 20, 25 mile days on trail and be in an ultralight pack, you know. Just get out there. We're at an amazing place. We haven't seen anyone all day long, and we're not that far into the backcountry at all. So
we went back to the cars today and had a soda and ate some sacks, and then we moved on to a different spot, and we just happened to have backpacks on our backs, and that's how we're getting out and enjoying it right now.
Yep. Well, I really appreciate you coming on to the podcast, Devin. I want you to give the listeners maybe a great video, specific video maybe, to go check out on your channel that you feel like maybe provides a lot of value. Obviously, just go check out his channel, but is there a specific video that comes to mind that you'd want to recommend? There
is, well, I'll point out two videos, and they are not gear-related videos in any way, because you can find gear wherever, and people are interested in it. But I recently did a video talking about like why I backpack, and shares a little bit more of like my history. And so like that would be interesting, I think, for people to go watch. But in the same vein, I put together a compilation basically of where I asked a lot of my subscribers and friends of mine to send video clips explaining why they backpack. Nice. And very inspiring video.
Yeah, what's the title on that one? Or roughly, at least.
I think it's called something like, I asked 10 friends why they backpack, and you wouldn't believe what they said, or something like that.
Awesome.
Maybe in the show notes or something, a link could be dropped. But
yeah. I'll have Joe find that out for us.
But those, when I think about videos that have actually made a pretty big impression on me of something that I've created, those are two things that come to mind.
That's awesome. Okay, well, we'll go ahead and call it a night. We have lost sunlight at this point. I can no longer see the little baby duckies swimming around the lake, but beautiful sunset, great conversation, really appreciate it. And go check out Devin. We'll make sure you guys like and subscribe. Make sure to drop us any reviews. We'll read those on the show as we get those to come in. And with that, we'll see you guys, or we'll hear you guys, I guess, on the next podcast episode.